Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into a truly sprawling theory of everything, one that tries to connect the dots between physics, consciousness, and, well, reality itself. So, this explainer is all about a theory that says, yes, it does. It proposes that there's one single fundamental thing that everything comes from. Okay, let's get into it. All right, so first up, one field to rule all. The entire structure of this theory, it's all built on just one core idea, a single foundational principle that everything else springs from. So what is that one principle? It's the idea of a contiguous vector field. Now, according to the source material, this field is the bedrock of reality. I want you to imagine something. Picture the universe not as an empty box with a bunch of stuff in it, but as one single massive ocean of energy. In this view, every particle, every force, every single inch of space, it's all just a different ripple or a wave or a current in this one universal substance. So the key takeaway here is it's not that things exist in the field, it's that things are the field. Okay, so if everything is this one big field, how does it work? What are the rules? Well, what's really interesting is how this field behaves. The theory lays out three fundamental laws that kind of act like the operating system for all of reality. Rule number one is the law of opposition, and it's a pretty profound idea. The theory basically argues that for anything to even exist, I mean anything from a tiny particle to a big concept, it has to be in a state of tension with something else. For there to be a this, there has to be a not this. It's this constant push and pull that carves actual reality out of just pure potential. Okay, on to the second rule, the law of fractals. This one's a mind bender. It says that reality is fractal. So what does that mean? It means the universe has this infinitely divisible, nested structure. Kind of like a cosmic set of Russian dolls. A particle, in this view, isn't just a simple point. It's an entire universe of interactions happening at a scale we can't even begin to perceive. And that brings us to the third and final rule, the cost of being. Think of it like this. The universe charges a tiny, fundamental energy price for anything to exist. It's this infinitesimal, non-zero value that keeps things defined and separate from just pure nothingness. You could almost call it the universe's fee for the privilege of being something rather than nothing. Okay, and this cost of being leads to a really fascinating example of how this theory sees the world differently from, say, pure mathematics. You probably learned in school that 0.999 repeating is exactly equal to 1, right? Well, this theory argues that in the physical world, that's not quite true. It says there's always a tiny non-zero gap, and that gap is the cost of being. So potential can get infinitely close to becoming an actual defined one, but it always has to pay that tiny price to make the final jump. Okay, so we have a single field and three rules. What does this all mean for physics? Well, this is where we get into physics reinterpreted. The goal of the theory isn't to replace our current formulas, but to provide the why behind the what we already know. All right, get ready for a truly radical idea. According to this theory, gravity isn't a fundamental force at all. It's an illusion. Instead, it suggests that time itself can be more or less concentrated in different parts of space. So what we feel as gravity is just the effect of us moving through this time gradient, going from an area where time is less dense to an area where it's more dense. Wild, right?
Next up, let's talk about probably the most famous equation in all of physics, E equals mc squared. We all know it. It's the what. It tells us exactly how much energy is locked up in a given amount of mass.
But again, this model tries to give us the why. So it defines mass as time compressed into space. And c squared? It suggests that's not just a random number, it's a cosmic conversion rate. Think of it like this. One c represents the speed limit of space, and the other c represents a boundary for time. So within this framework, the equation stops being just math and starts describing a real physical process. Okay, we've talked physics, but now we're going to venture into something even more profound. This is where the theory tackles the ghost in the machine. It proposes that consciousness isn't just some random byproduct of our brains, but a fundamental field that actually interacts with reality. And to explain this, the source material proposes something it calls the equation of manifestation. The claim is that our reality is actively shaped by consciousness. So let's break this down because it's a big idea. It starts with will, which is basically your intent. That intent is then guided by your knowledge, what you understand to be possible. This combination of will and knowledge then acts on the field of all possibility to create a real physical manifestation. That could be an action, a movement, a tangible change in the world around you. So, starting from that equation, the theory tries to build a physical basis for some really abstract concepts. For example, it defines willpower as a direct physical influence on that vector field we talked about earlier. And it even has a take on quantum immortality, that thought experiment. It suggests consciousness doesn't just survive by random chance, but that it actively steers itself through the multiverse to maintain its own existence and coherence.
So, is this a theory of everything? The really crucial part of this whole idea is how it attempts to tie everything together from the very big to the very small, and even find meaning in some really unexpected places.
And I mean, really unexpected places. If you've ever read or seen The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you know that the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is 42.
But what if that wasn't just a joke? The theory asks, what if 42 isn't the answer to life, but the answer to one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in physics? And that's something called the hierarchy problem, which is basically just the question of why gravity is so incredibly ridiculously weak compared to the other forces of nature. We're talking about 10 to the power of 42 times weaker, in fact.
So according to this model, that number, 42, isn't random at all. It supposedly represents the exact orders of magnitude difference between the universe's neutral baseline state, the state that generates gravity, and the more energetic, charged states that generate forces like electromagnetism. So in this theory, that famous joke is actually a profound physical truth hiding in plain sight the whole time. And all of this leaves us with one last big, provocative question. Is reality fundamentally a mathematical construct, or is math an emergent property of reality? This theory, as you've seen, argues for the second option. It says that mathematics itself, with all its numbers and its laws, is something that emerges from the universe's fundamental need to define itself through opposition. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Maybe we don't use math to describe the universe. Maybe the universe invented math to describe itself.